Hello friends, in this video, I will tell you some interesting and at the same time scary stories related to Craigslist. If you like the video, you can subscribe to the channel. This will help greatly in promoting the channel. Thank you. In the year 2019, in the bustling state of Texas, a young woman by the name of Amanda was looking to purchase a laptop for her studies. She had heard about Craigslist and decided to search for a suitable seller. After finding a vendor who seemed legitimate, Amanda made an appointment to meet with him in person to make the purchase. On the day of the meeting, Amanda was filled with excitement and anticipation. She had saved up enough money to buy the laptop she needed, and she was eager to finally have a device that would make her studies much easier. She got dressed in her best outfit and made her way to the appointed location, which was a quiet street with a few houses and a park nearby. As she approached the address, she saw a man waiting for her. He was holding a laptop and had a friendly smile on his face. Amanda introduced herself, and the man said his name was Jack. They began to talk about the laptop, and Jack seemed very knowledgeable about the features and specifications. However, after a few minutes, Jack's demeanor changed. He suddenly became aggressive and started to demand that Amanda give him all of her cash. Amanda was confused and scared, not understanding why Jack would want her money. She hesitated for a moment, but Jack grabbed her and pushed her against a nearby wall. In an instant, Jack pulled out a knife and started to attack Amanda. She tried to defend herself, but Jack was too strong and too fast. He stabbed her repeatedly, about 20 times, as she screamed for help. Amanda's world went dark, and she collapsed on the ground. The people in the nearby park heard Amanda's cries and called the police. By the time they arrived, it was too late. Amanda had passed away from her injuries. The police found Jack at the scene, covered in blood and holding Amanda's laptop and money. He was immediately arrested and taken into custody. The trial was a long and painful process for Amanda's family and friends. They had lost a bright and promising young woman, and they wanted justice for her death. The evidence was overwhelming, and Jack was found guilty of murder and robbery. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Amanda's loved ones were devastated by her loss, but they were grateful that justice had been served. They knew that Amanda's memory would live on, and they hoped that her tragic story would serve as a warning to others about the dangers of meeting strangers online. In the end, Amanda's legacy was one of hope and resilience, and her loved ones would always remember her as a shining light in their lives. In 2020 Florida, a young man named Adam had been saving up for months to buy his dream car, a sleek black Mustang. He had been scouring Craigslist for weeks until he finally found the perfect one. The seller, a man named Jack, had listed it for a price that was almost too good to be true, but after a few phone calls and text messages, Adam felt confident that he had found a great deal. They agreed to meet at a deserted parking lot near the highway. Adam arrived on time, his heart racing with excitement as he pulled up in his old Honda. Jack was already there, leaning against the Mustang with a sly grin on his face. "Hey man, you must be Adam," Jack said, extending his hand. "I'm Jack. Nice to meet you." Adam shook his hand eagerly, his eyes scanning over the car. It looked even better in person than it did in the pictures. "So, you ready to take her for a spin?" Jack asked. Adam nodded eagerly, feeling like a kid on Christmas morning. He handed over the cash, and Jack handed him the keys. They walked around the car, admiring its curves and sleek lines. But as soon as Adam got into the driver's seat and started the engine, everything went wrong. Suddenly, Jack's demeanor changed. He pulled out a knife and demanded that Adam hand over all of his money. Adam tried to fight back, but Jack was too strong. He beat Adam severely, breaking his arm and several ribs in the process. He stole the cash and drove off in both Adam's car and the Mustang. Adam lay there in the parking lot for what felt like hours, in excruciating pain and barely able to move. Finally, a passerby found him and called 911. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed him to the hospital, where he spent several weeks recovering from his injuries. Meanwhile, the police were on the hunt for Jack. They used the phone number he had given Adam to track him down, and eventually they found him hiding out in a motel on the outskirts of town. He had sold both cars for a fraction of their value and had spent the money on drugs and alcohol. Jack was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and grand theft auto. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. As for Adam, he never fully recovered from the trauma of the incident. He sold his old Honda and used the insurance money to buy a different car. But he could never shake the feeling of unease whenever he went to meet someone from Craigslist. He became more cautious, always bringing a friend with him and never carrying large amounts of cash. But despite everything, Adam knew that he was lucky to be alive. He had learned a valuable lesson about trusting strangers and always staying aware of his surroundings. And while he could never forget what had happened to him, he was determined to move forward and not let the experience define his life. In the year 2018 in California, the streets of Los Angeles were bustling with people going about their daily lives. Amongst these people was a young man named Jack, who was eagerly awaiting the upcoming concert of his favorite band, The Killers. Jack had been trying to get tickets for the concert for weeks, but they were sold out everywhere. Frustrated and desperate, Jack decided to try his luck on Craigslist. After hours of scrolling through ads, Jack finally came across a listing for the tickets he wanted. The seller, who went by the name of Tony, had listed the tickets at a reasonable price. Jack quickly contacted Tony, and they arranged to meet up in a quiet alley in downtown LA. On the day of the meeting, Jack arrived at the alley at the agreed-upon time. He was nervous and excited at the same time. He had never bought tickets from a stranger before, but he was willing to take the risk to see his favorite band perform. Tony was already there, waiting for Jack. As Jack approached Tony, he noticed something was off. Tony looked nervous and agitated. Jack tried to ignore it and handed over the cash to Tony in exchange for the tickets. But as soon as Tony had the cash in his hand, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at Jack. "Give me everything you have," Tony shouted. Jack was shocked and scared. He didn't know what to do. Tony fired several shots at Jack, hitting him in the chest and leg. Jack fell to the ground, bleeding profusely. Tony quickly took Jack's shoes, phone, and cash. He left Jack lying on the ground, struggling to breathe. Jack's vision began to fade as he saw Tony running away with his belongings. As luck would have it, a police car was passing by, and the officers heard the gunshots. They rushed to the scene and found Jack lying on the ground, barely conscious. They called an ambulance, and Jack was taken to the hospital. Jack survived the attack, but was left with permanent scars, both physical and emotional. He had lost all his cash and documents, which made it hard for him to get back on his feet. But worst of all, he had lost his trust in people. The police launched an investigation into the incident and were able to track down Tony. He was arrested and brought to trial. It was discovered that Tony had a history of violence and was involved in several other criminal activities. After a long and arduous trial, Tony was found guilty of attempted murder and robbery. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Jack, he slowly started to rebuild his life. It took him a long time to regain his confidence and trust in people, but he eventually did. He never forgot what had happened to him, but he didn't let it define him. He went on to pursue his dreams and live a fulfilling life, but he always remembered to be cautious and aware of his surroundings. The incident left a deep impact on Jack and everyone who knew him. It was a reminder of the dangers of trusting strangers and the importance of being cautious in this unpredictable world. In the year 2021, In the bustling city of New York, a young man named Jack was scrolling through Craigslist when he stumbled upon a post advertising a bicycle for sale. Jack was an avid cyclist and had been looking for a new bike for a while, so he quickly contacted the seller to arrange a meeting. The seller, whose name was Tom, suggested they meet in a quiet alleyway near Jack's apartment. Jack was a bit hesitant about the location, but Tom assured him that it was just a shortcut to the bike shop where he worked. On the day of the meeting, Jack arrived at the alleyway and saw Tom standing there with a group of men. Jack was immediately wary and trying to back away, but before he could make a move, the men rushed towards him. They grabbed Jack and began to beat him mercilessly, demanding that he hand over all his money. Jack was scared for his life and handed over his cash, but the men didn't stop there. They continued to beat him until he was unconscious and left him lying in the alleyway. Jack woke up several hours later in a hospital room. He had been badly injured in the attack, but thankfully he had survived. As he lay there, Jack couldn't help but think about the horror he had faced in that alleyway. It wasn't until the next day that Jack learned the shocking truth about what had happened to him. The police have found another man's body in the same alleyway where Jack had been attacked. The man had also been a victim of a Craigslist scam and had been killed by the same group of men who had attacked Jack. The news sent chills down Jack's spine. He realized that he could have easily been the one who had been killed if he had not been lucky enough to survive the attack. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude for still being alive, but he also felt a sense of fear. He couldn't shake off the feeling that the men who had attacked him were still out there, preying on innocent victims like himself. Jack knew that he had to do something to make sure that nobody else would fall victim to these dangerous criminals. Determined to seek justice, Jack decided to work with the police to track down the men responsible for the attacks. He spent countless hours scouring Craigslist for any leads and gathering evidence that could help the police catch the criminals. Finally, after months of hard work and determination, Jack's efforts paid off. The police were able to arrest the men responsible for the attacks and bring them to justice. As he watched the men being led away in handcuffs, Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had faced his fears and had successfully helped bring closure to a terrible chapter in his life. From that day forward, Jack made a promise to himself that he would never let fear hold him back from living his life to the fullest. He continued to cycle and explore the city, but he did so with a newfound appreciation for the fragility of life and the importance of staying vigilant in the face of danger. In the year 2017, in the sunny state of Arizona, a woman by the name of Emily was a successful businesswoman and a well-known investor in small circles. Her life was full of exciting adventures, and she was always looking for the next opportunity to invest in. One day, while browsing through Craigslist, Emily stumbled upon a post that caught her eye. It was a picture of a ring that looked suspiciously like one that she had lost many years ago. Emily immediately contacted the seller and arranged a meeting to take a closer look at the ring. On the day of the meeting, Emily arrived at the designated location and met with the seller, a man named David. He seemed like a normal person at first, but as soon as Emily took the ring out of its box to examine it, David suddenly attacked her with a knife. Emily was caught off guard and didn't have a chance to defend herself. David left several wounds on her body and stole her money before fleeing the scene. Emily was rushed to the hospital, where she underwent surgery to repair her injuries. The incident shocked the community, and the police launched an extensive investigation to find the perpetrator. With the help of eyewitnesses and security footage from the area, David was eventually tracked down and arrested. During his trial, David admitted to his crimes and was found guilty of assault and theft. He was sentenced to several years in prison, and Emily finally got the justice she deserved. However, the incident left a lasting impact on Emily. She was no longer the same confident and adventurous person she once was. She became more cautious and fearful, always looking over her shoulder and second-guessing her decisions. But with time, Emily learned to heal and grow stronger. she refused to let the incident define her, and instead used it as motivation to become an even more successful businesswoman and investor. She became an advocate for victims of assault and worked to raise awareness about the importance of safety and self-defense. In the end, Emily emerged from the incident as a survivor and a hero. She showed that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to overcome and thrive. And her story serves as a reminder to us all that we should never take our safety for granted and always be prepared for the unexpected. In the year 2018, in the hot and humid state of Texas, a man by the name of John had been eagerly waiting for a package that was supposed to arrive any day now. The package contained a harmonica, which he had been desperately searching for to add to his collection. He had been searching for it everywhere and had finally found it on Craigslist. The seller, a mysterious man named Alex, had claimed that the harmonica had come straight from Russia and would look great in John's collection. After several emails and phone calls, John had finally agreed to meet Alex at a small park near his house. He was thrilled at the prospect of finally owning the harmonica he had been searching for. On the day of the meeting, John arrived at the park early and waited anxiously for Alex to arrive. As he waited, he noticed a group of shady-looking individuals lurking around the park. He thought nothing of it and assumed that they were just people passing through. However, as time passed, John started to feel uneasy. Alex was nowhere to be found, and the group of individuals were starting to get closer and closer to him. Just as John was about to leave, the group of individuals attacked him from behind. They took everything he had on him, including his wallet, phone, and watch. They'd also left him severely beaten and injured. John was left lying on the ground, bleeding and in excruciating pain. The assailants had disappeared without a trace. The police were immediately called and an investigation was launched. It was discovered that the group of individuals had planned the robbery for weeks and had targeted John specifically because of the harmonica he was supposed to be carrying. However, the harmonica was nowhere to be found and Alex was also missing. Days turned into weeks and the investigation seemed to be going nowhere. However, a breakthrough finally came when one of the assailants was caught trying to sell John's watch. He immediately confessed to the crime and gave the police information on the whereabouts of the other assailants. One by one, the assailants were caught and brought to justice. It was discovered that Alex was the mastermind behind the robbery and had fled the state immediately after the crime. However, he was eventually caught and brought back to Texas to face trial. In court, Alex pleaded guilty to the crime and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. John, on the other hand, had to undergo several surgeries and physical therapy to recover from his injuries. He never did get the harmonica he had been searching for, but he did gain a newfound appreciation for life and the people around him. In the end, justice was served, and the people responsible for the heinous crime were punished. John, although scarred both physically and emotionally, was able to move on with his life and learn to appreciate the little things that truly mattered. The incident would always be a part of him, but he was determined not to let it define him. In the year 2019, in the bustling city of New York, a young man named Jack was on the hunt for a new camera to capture his photography hobby. He stumbled upon a Craigslist ad for a camera that piqued his interest and immediately reached out to the seller to set up a meeting. The seller, who went by the name of David, agreed to meet Jack at a local coffee shop in the heart of the city. Jack arrived on time and found David waiting for him. The two exchanged pleasantries, and David showed Jack the camera. After examining it, Jack was pleased with what he saw and agreed to purchase the camera. David offered to accompany Jack back to his apartment to finalize the transaction, and Jack, not suspecting anything, agreed. On the way back, Jack noticed that David was acting a bit strange and seemed to be looking around nervously. But Jack brushed it off and continued walking with David. When they reached Jack's apartment, he invited David inside. David quickly looked around and seemed satisfied with the location. Jack paid for the camera, and David left without incident. Little did Jack know that David had been following him and had made a mental note of where he lived. That night, a group of robbers, led by David, broke into Jack's apartment and demanded that he hand over all his valuables. Jack, not one to go down without a fight, resisted the robbers' demands, leading to a struggle. In the chaos that ensued, Jack was shot multiple times and died on the spot. The robbers quickly grabbed whatever valuables they could find and fled the scene. The police were called, and an investigation was launched to find the culprits responsible for Jack's death. Despite the initial confusion and lack of evidence, the police were eventually able to identify the robbers and bring them to justice. David, the ringleader, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with several other charges related to the robbery. The trial was a long and drawn-out affair, with witnesses and evidence being presented on both sides. The prosecution argued that David and his group had planned the robbery and murder for weeks, while the defense claimed that David was not involved and was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. After several months of hearings and testimony, the jury finally reached a verdict. David and his accomplices were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jack's family and friends were relieved that justice had been served, but they were still left with a deep sense of sadness and loss. They would never be able to see Jack again, and his promising future as a photographer was cut tragically short. In the end, the story of Jack's murder served as a warning to others about the dangers of buying items from strangers and inviting them into one's home. It was a cautionary tale of the dark side of the internet and the risks that can come with trying to make a quick purchase. But for Jack's loved ones, it was a reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment we have. In the summer of 2021, the sun was shining bright in the city of California. The streets were filled with people enjoying the warm weather. And for one woman, it was the perfect day to finally buy the mountain bike she had been eyeing for months. She had found the perfect bike on Craigslist and had made arrangements to meet the seller at a nearby park. The woman arrived at the meeting place, and the seller was waiting for her. He was a tall man with a scruffy beard, and she immediately felt uneasy around him. As they exchanged pleasantries, the seller handed her the bike to inspect it. It looked exactly as advertised, and the woman was ready to make the purchase. However, as she reached into her purse to retrieve the cash, the seller attacked her from behind. The woman screamed for help, but the seller quickly overpowered her. He doused her with a liquid that burned her skin, and she fell to the ground, writhing in pain. The attacker grabbed her purse and ran off, leaving the woman lying there, helpless and alone. Eventually, someone heard her screams and called for help. The woman was rushed to the hospital, where she received treatment for the chemical burns. Despite the physical pain, the emotional trauma was even worse. She couldn't believe that someone had attacked her in broad daylight like that, and she couldn't shake the feeling of fear that lingered long after the attack. The police quickly launched an investigation into the attack, and they were able to track down the seller through the Craigslist ad. It turned out that he had a long history of criminal behavior, and he was arrested and charged with assault, theft, and a litany of other crimes. As the trial approached, the woman couldn't help but feel anxious. She knew that she would have to face her attacker in court, and the thought of seeing him again made her feel sick to her stomach. But she was determined to see justice served, and so she took the stand and recounted the attack in detail. The defense tried to discredit her testimony, but the evidence was overwhelming. The attacker was found guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For the woman, the verdict brought some sense of closure, but the scars from the attack would never fully heal. She still thought about the incident often, and she was always looking over her shoulder, wondering if she would ever be safe again. But through it all, she never lost her spirit, and she remained determined to live her life on her own terms, no matter what challenges came her way. In the year 2017, in the bustling city of Chicago, Illinois, a young man named Jake was thrilled about his plans to purchase a new game console through Craigslist. He had been saving up for months, and this was the perfect opportunity to finally get his hands on the coveted device. Jake had contacted the vendor and arranged to meet at a nearby park. The vendor, a person named John, had agreed to the time and location. But little did Jake know that his life was about to change forever. On the day of the meeting, Jake arrived at the park and waited for John. But to his surprise, several men approached him instead. They were dressed in dark clothing and had their faces covered. Before he could even react, they had attacked him with a knife and robbed him of his money and other belongings. Jake fought back with all his strength, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. The attackers fled the scene, leaving Jake lying there bleeding and helpless. A passerby saw him and called for an ambulance. Jake was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent surgery for his injuries. Fortunately, he survived the attack, but he was traumatized by the experience. The police were called to the scene, and an investigation was launched. It was later revealed that John the vendor had orchestrated the entire attack. He had hired the assailants to rob Jake and had planned to split the proceeds with them. John and his accomplices were eventually caught and charged with multiple crimes, including robbery and attempted murder. The trial took place several months later, and it was a long and drawn-out process. Witnesses were called to testify, evidence was presented, and the defendants were given the opportunity to defend themselves. The trial lasted for several weeks, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Jake had to relive the trauma of the attack as he testified, but he remained strong and resolute. The defendants tried to argue that they were not involved in the attack, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. John and his accomplices were found guilty on all counts and were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Jake finally had closure, knowing that justice had been served. Although the experience had been traumatic, Jake was able to find peace and move on with his life. He learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of meeting strangers online and vowed to always take precautions in the future. In the end, this was a story of perseverance and resilience in the face of adversity. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, justice can be served and the truth will prevail. In 2016 in California, a young man named Jack was searching for the perfect outfit for his best friend's wedding. He had exhausted all his options and was running out of time. So he turned to Craigslist in hopes of finding a seller who could sell him the perfect suit. After scrolling through many ads, he finally found one that piqued his interest. The seller seemed reliable, and the pictures of the suits he was selling looked great. Jack quickly arranged to meet the seller at a nearby park. On the day of the appointment, Jack was excited and anxious at the same time. He arrived early and waited for the salesman to appear. A few minutes later, he saw a man walking toward him. The man introduced himself as the salesman and asked if Jack had brought the money. Jack nodded and handed over the money. The salesman then handed him a suit and asked him to try it on. While Jack was changing, he heard a loud noise outside and felt a pain around his shoulder. The sound was like a gunshot. He quickly turned around to see what was going on. He was met by another gunshot and felt a burning pain in his stomach. He fell to the ground, feeling weak and disoriented. He saw the salesman running away with the money and the suit. Jack tried to get up, but he couldn't. He knew he was dying. The ambulance arrived quickly, but it was too late. Jack had lost a lot of blood, and the 2 gunshot wounds were too severe. Medics tried to revive him, but he died on the way to the hospital. The news of his death shocked everyone who knew him, especially his best friend, who was getting married the next week. The police quickly launched an investigation and found the perpetrator, a man named Mark, who had a history of violent crime. He was caught red-handed with a suit and money. When questioned, he claimed to have shot Jack in self-defense. However, the evidence showed there was a cold-blooded murder and robbery. Mark's trial lasted several months. It was an emotional and difficult time for Jack's family and friends, who had to endure the pain of his death every day. The courtroom was tense and much evidence was presented. However, the highlight of the trial was the testimony of a witness who testified that he saw Mark shoot Jack from a distance. The witness's testimony was decisive, and because of it, Mark was found guilty of murder and robbery. Mark was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, but it did little to ease the pain of Jack's family and friends. His best friend had to get married without him, and it was a bittersweet moment for everyone. However, they knew that Jack would have wanted them to celebrate his life rather than mourn his death. In conclusion, the tragic story of Jack's death serves as a reminder that we should always be careful and vigilant when dealing with strangers. It also shows that justice may take time to be done, but in the end it will prevail. Jack's memory will always be cherished by those who loved him, and his death will never be forgotten. In the year 2018, in the bustling city of Miami, Florida, a young woman named Sarah was on the hunt for her dream motorcycle. After scouring through various local dealerships and online websites, she stumbled upon a listing on Craigslist that caught her eye. It was a beautiful black motorcycle that she had been dreaming of for years. She contacted the seller immediately and set up an appointment to meet him in a quiet area outside the city. The excitement of finally owning her dream motorcycle was all Sarah could think about as she prepared for the meeting. On the day of the meeting, Sarah made her way to the location, eager to finally see the motorcycle in person. As she arrived, she saw a group of men loitering around the area. Despite feeling uneasy, Sarah assumed they were just casual passers-by and proceeded to approach the seller. However, things took a dark turn quickly as the seller and his accomplices overpowered her and stole not only her money, but also the motorcycle. Sarah was left shaken and helpless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Fortunately, the police were quick to respond to her distress call and arrived at the scene within minutes. They immediately began investigating the crime and questioning the suspects. Sarah provided a detailed description of the assailants, and the police were able to track them down and make arrests in record time. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah struggled to come to terms with the traumatic event. She found it hard to trust strangers and struggled with anxiety and fear. Despite this, she knew she had to find a way to move on from the experience. The trial of the assailants began, and Sarah was called to testify. The courtroom was tense as she took the stand, recounting the events of that fateful day. The defense trying to poke holes in her story, but Sarah remained steadfast and resolute in her testimony. The climax of the trial came when the judge handed down the verdict, finding all the assailants guilty of robbery and theft. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief as she watched them being taken away in handcuffs. Months later, Sarah received a call from the police department, informing her that her motorcycle had been recovered. Despite being initially hesitant, she decided to go and see it. As she saw her beloved motorcycle again, a wave of emotions washed over her, and she felt a sense of closure and peace. In the end, Sarah was able to move past the traumatic experience and come out stronger on the other side. She learned to trust her instincts and always be cautious, but she also learned the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for herself. The experience had changed her, but she was determined not to let it define her. My opinion. I think that all of these stories are due to the fact that the victims were not careful and were not attentive when buying things. If they had taken something with them for self-defense, or if possible called their friends, they would have remained in one piece, and so they got hurt for their lack of responsibility. Learn from their mistakes, or you'll have a chance to get in my next video. Thanks for watching.